Welcome to Bunny Trails, a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase. I'm Shauna Harrison.
And I'm Dan Pugh. Each week, we take an idiom or other turn of phrase and try to tell the story from its entry into the English language to how it's used today. Have you ever been in a situation where you are trying to remember something, but you just can't think of it? Or maybe you need to come up with something creative, but you just can't get your mind to hone in on what you want. In both cases, you might be said to be racking your brains. So first, a quick word of thanks to our Dean of Learning, our top patron, Mary Hulsig Lopez, as she is the one who first suggested this phrase to us. It was on the community tab of our Patreon, which is available to everyone from the free tiers to our top spot. And you can join Mary and many others on our Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod. And with that quick self-promo out of the way.
Well done.
So according to the Oxford English Dictionary, rack my brains means, quote, to make a great effort to think of or remember something, end quote. So the word doing most of the work here is rack, and that is spelled R-A-C-K. There is an alternate spelling, but it has historically meant something different, and we're going to talk about that right before the break. So we're going to focus on the spelling R-A-C-K. So this word rack has been around since the early 1300s. A rack was a frame where cloth or parchment was stretched before drying. And this is the origin of rack as in clothes rack. It is also the use of the word that has been applied to the torture device that stretches the victim, but we are not going to talk about that.
I was thinking in my mind, though, that probably was, the same. Okay.
Yeah, same origins, but we're going to... Yes, it is disturbing. So we're going to not talk about the torture device. We're going to talk about rack on the other side, as in clothes rack. In the early 1400s, we start to see the word get verbified to refer to the action of stretching. And do not come at me about the word verbified. It has been in use to describe the act of taking a noun and making it a verb since at least the early 1800s.
It's not a new term that somebody...
It is not a new term.
Yeah.
You are correct. And I know sometimes people are like, verbify, what are even these young people? Well, you are way too young to have been using verbified when it first came out, so I don't want to hear it. Old people.
It's also a great description of what's happening.
It is. I feel comfortable calling other people old people because when it comes to words, I have gotten into that spot where I have to stop myself because I want to be like, that's not a real word, but language evolves. So It can be a real word if enough people use it, and if the speaker is able to use it to communicate to the other person, it can be a real word. But verbify is one that's been around since the early 1800s. Okay, so rack as a verb is what we're going to look at with our phrase. And we'll start with a work written in the 1500s. This one is from Select Poetry, Chiefly Devotional of the Reign of Queen Elizabeth, version 1. And this is edited by Edward Farr. While this book was published in 1845, it's full of collected works that were written during the reign of Queen Elizabeth of England, who ruled from 1558 until 1603. She is commonly referred to as Queen Elizabeth I. Here is a piece that comes from the Care for Thy Soul by William Byrd, which the Oxford English Dictionary notes is from 1583. And this verse includes a version of our phrase where the word rack is being paired with the word wit to come to the same meaning as rack your brain. Quote, care for the world to do thy body right. Rack not thy wit to win by wicked ways. Seek not to oppress the weak by wrongful might. To pay thy due, do banish all delays. Care to dispend according to thy store, and in like sort be mindful of the poor. End quote. So that's the first time that we could see something like that in print, or at least the first time I found it. Doesn't mean it's the first, but rack not thy wit to win by wicked ways. So rack your brain is the way they were using that.
It's really cool. They're like, don't be coming up with all of the bad ways you can't think of to win.
Right. And in that case, they're talking about it as in you're creating something, not trying to remember something, but thinking of something. You're trying to think of something original or something of that nature.
Right.
We'll move into an example where we are using Rack Your Brain, and this is from The Last Remains of Sir John Suckling, which was a collection of his poems and letters. This poem was written in French, and according to page 15 of the work, was Englished thus by the author. Now, once again, that is a verbified word, right? Englished, right? So it's been verbified. In this case, in 1659, he verbified this.
Oh,
All right.
that's
Now, he didn't
hilarious.
use the word verbified to say
But
it,
he did.
but the action
Yeah.
has been there for even longer than we've had the word verbified. I just want to make sure that people aren't coming at me about this. I was also shocked to find out how old this concept was.
Funny.
So this is, I believe this is referencing Humphrey Moseley, who wrote the foreword and printed the work in 1659 at the Prince's Arms in St. Paul's Churchyard in London. So this is from a section called Disdain. Quote, I cannot break so sweet a bond unless I prove untrue, nor can I ever be so fond to prove untrue for you. Your attempts are but in vain, to tell you is a favor. For things that may be, rack your brain, then lose not thus your labor. End quote.
Okay.
All right. So this one has more of a trying to remember a type of thing for things that may be. But you don't need to remember those and lose your labor on and focus on old things and try to remember them. This next example is from a 1688 English translation of Quintus Horatius Flaccus, more commonly known as Horace. The translated work was called The Odes, Satires, and Epistles of Horace. Quote, "'Tis virtue, sir, to be but free from vice, and the first step towards being truly wise is to want folly, you use all your skill, to shun what you suppose the greatest ill. A small estate, or whilst you seek to gain an office, a repulse, you spare no pain. You try your utmost wit and rack your brain." End quote.
Nice.
This one uses wit and brain, both. Try your utmost wit and rack your brain. Again, this is a trying to think of something here. So we're seeing it used in both ways, even in the early stages. Next up is a work called The Invisible Spy, Volume 2 by Explorabilis, which is a pen name, a pseudonym, a nom de plume, of Eliza Fowler Haywood. There are earlier versions of this work before 1773 with several books in each volume, but I couldn't find the phrase which appears in Book 8, Chapter 1 in any of the earlier works, so I'm uncertain when that particular phrase got added or was put into it. It could be, I didn't see a Book 8 at all in earlier works, so it could be that 1773 was the first time the Book 8 was written, but I know the book I found it in was printed in London in 1773, so I'm going to use that date and just note that it could have been earlier. I'll read a short snippet from what the spy overhears from a group of Presbyterians who are defending a parishioner, who it appears is not a good person, from one who is trying to help them see that they should not be defending the person just because they attend the same church. It feels a little too familiar these days.
Wow.
All right, so 1773. Quote, "I am surprised, sir, you should rack your brain for arguments against the cause of helpless innocence and virtue in distress." End quote. Yeah, a little too close to home, I think, for today's time as well. The more things change, I guess the more they stay the same.
Yeah.
This next one comes to us from Australia in the Melbourne Punch. This is dated November 20th, 1862. The Punch is a satirical newspaper, and this section was called Diogenes to Punch. So Diogenes was a Greek philosopher and one of the founders of Cynicism. In it used the goddess Atalanta as a stand-in for something attractive on the outside, but full of hypocrisy on the inside. Here's part of the article, quote, "And so you bow and smile and rack your brain for pretty pearls to lay before this little, well, let us say girl, while if you knew the heart that lay hid under the beautiful covering of flesh, remember flesh is all you see, as insipides are all you hear, you'd go away wondering at the worthless bran with which your doll was stuffed." End quote.
Wow.
So saying, yes, she's beautiful, this goddess, but she is not something you want to get mixed up with.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, insipides are things being said that lack taste or judgment, and they may be dull, banal, or just lacking spirit or interest. In case that word is unfamiliar to you, as it was to me. I'd heard it, but I wasn't 100% sure that I knew what it meant. This next one is from the Weekly News out of Courtenay, British Columbia, and that's in Canada, and it's dated September 17th, 1895. It's from a piece titled Proverb Revised for the Time. And I think it's an update of Aesop's fable about the ants and the grasshopper. But if anyone has another story this could be updating, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So kick us a note. Here is the parable with author unknown. Quote, "Go to the sluggard, thou ant. Consider his ways and be wise. Why sorry and fret and toil and sweat while he at leisure lies? You labor from morn till evening, from early spring till fall, as the sluggard eats as many sweets as you with no labor at all. You fill your store for winter, but some old hungry hen will scent your wheat and with sharp clawed feet will scratch it out again. You'll starve and freeze, but the sluggard, at charity's table fed, will revel in fat when you lie flat on your back in the gutter dead. Then learn from the sluggard, O ant, enjoy your time as it flies, nor rack your brain for a heap of grain while he in slumber lies." End quote.
All right.
So they have taken this and kind of turned it to be, you don't have to, it's kind of the ant is working for, this other person who, the luggard, and you don't actually have to be giving them stuff, which I believe the original fable was kind of that nature, where they were like, the grasshopper didn't make it through the winter because while they're whatevering, playing their music or whatever, the ants just like turned around and didn't give them any food. But yeah, in this case, the grasshopper keeps getting the food anyway, even though they're not working for it, which I think is an interesting tale. Yeah, I mean, there is a line, and I think most people recognize it. There's a line somewhere between you have to try and do things to be prepared, but also we want to help you in case you can't get there, versus I'm just not going to do anything and someone will help me out with a handout or a help up or a whatever,
Right.
And I think where we draw that line varies greatly between societies and between impressions in society and perspectives. But there is nonetheless a line somewhere in that spectrum. Now we have two examples from the 1940s, and these showcase the two primary ways that we see the phrase used. The first is trying really hard to remember something, while the second is trying hard to think of something in the first place. Rack your brain, as we've noted, is used interchangeably in both ways today and usually requires context to know which way it's meant, though in most cases the point is made regardless of which way the author meant it. So it doesn't really most of the time matter whether you are racking your brain trying to think of something that you have forgotten or rack your brain trying to think of something original. And in both of those cases, the phrase makes its point usually, so it really doesn't matter. But we're going to see two different ways it's used within 2.5 years of each other, just so that we can kind of see the differences in this and know how it's being used. Here's the first of the two, which focuses on remembering something. It's out of the Evening Star, Washington, D.C., USA, dated December 23rd, 1943. It's an ad for war bonds. This time frame, it would have been World War II, so it's advocating a war bond in every stocking. Of course, December 23rd, 1943, just before Christmas. Quote, "Rack your brain, run over your Christmas list rapidly. Whom have you forgotten? Uncle Bill, Aunt Ruth, little Jimmy? Don't worry, a war bond will put you in their good graces, and it's the most appreciated gift, the most wonderful gift you can give." End quote. I do question if little Jimmy really cares about that war bond.
Does little Jimmy want the war bond?
Yeah. I mean, as adults, Uncle Bill and Aunt Ruth probably are not going to throw too much of a fit about it. Although in those days, you just had so many kids sometimes. And it's like your Aunt Ruth could have been 10, So
Yeah.
Anyway, and the second, just 2.5 years later, is focused on thinking about something. It's also an advertisement, this time for jewelry. and it is out of the Pascagoula Chronicle Star in Mississippi, USA, dated May 3rd, 1946. Quote, "There is no need to rack your brain wondering what to give when the most welcome, enduring, and satisfying gift of all is jewelry." End quote.
There you go.
There you go. Don't rack your brain about it.
Stop
You don't have to
trying
think of
so
something new.
hard.
Just give them jewelry or
Yeah.
war bonds, whichever.
It's a gift to suit any mood.
That's right. That's right. You got one or the other, you'll be fine. So the last thing before we jump to the modern uses, I want to address the spelling of rack like I talked about up front. Usually it's spelled R-A-C-K, but sometimes we've seen W-R-A-C-K. The OED notes that rack with a W is used to describe the wreck of a ship as retributive punishment, like in vengeance, and as causing damage or disaster to a person or item. So that's how rack with a W is used.
Okay.
Here's a post from Merriam-Webster on the subject. Quote, "Rack with an R and rack with W in rack one's brain and nerve-wracking have been used interchangeably since the late 19th century, and both spellings are commonly encountered today in edited prose. Those who prescribe a distinction, however, recommend the original and etymologically backed uses, which means that rack, R, rack one's brain, and nerve-wracking, and saving rack W for boat and storm-related imagery such as storm-racked and rack and ruin." End quote. So that means you can use them interchangeably if you wish, but if writing based on a style guide or for some sort of formal setting, you may want to do the same thing Merriam-Webster has recommended and stick with that particular piece where you've drawn the distinction between the two. All right, so with that, it is time to move to our sponsors. So we're going to jump right in and do that.
This episode is sponsored by our amazing patrons on Patreon. And the cool thing about Patreon is it is 100% free to join the community. We have new things every weekday on the feeds. On Mondays, we have a conversation about what movies, shows, books, podcasts, and whatever else everyone is enjoying. Tuesdays see early access to the week's podcast. Wednesdays have all the links, books, songs, and other content mentioned in the week's episode. Thursday has patrons-only polls, and Fridays are our lightly edited behind-the-scenes video featuring all the cut content, goofs, and bonus facts you could imagine.
We've got some other pretty cool stuff too, like original digital artwork once a month made by Shauna, and direct access to talk with us. No algorithms getting in the way of what we see or don't see. Plus, you can get awesome name recognition like Pat Rowe does every episode. And our top spot is currently occupied by the amazing Mary Halsig Lopez. You can join the Bunny Trails community for free at Bunny Trails Pod on Patreon.
That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod.
We will start in these modern uses with 1981 and the song Rack My Brain, spelled with a W, sung by Ringo Starr in a solo hit of his. Ringo Starr is obviously of Beatles fame, if you're not familiar. It was released in 1981 on the album Stop and Smell the Roses. It feels very much like a Beatles song, probably because the song was written by fellow Beatles alum George Harrison, who also plays guitar and does the backup vocals. So
Okay.
the song is a frustration with the music industry and the pressure to produce hits. Here are some of the lyrics. Quote, "What I have, you don't want. What you want, I can't give. I got out of touch with you and yours, the way that you live. I try to do my best for you while the sky pours down the rain. Rack my brain." End quote.
Very Beatles.
It is. It's very good. George Harrison was always my favorite of the Beatles, which I know most people will go for John or Paul.
I would argue that a lot of people don't know that he was one of the Beatles. Like they
Fair
don't know
enough.
they wouldn't recognize the name. They're like, that was a president, right?
Well, anyway, I'm not going to go off on a Beatles fan cast here, but so this song with the two of them together felt very much like the Beatles, even though it was missing, the other two. And in fact, there were two other songs that were going to come out on this album that were written by John Lennon, and John was going to do the backups, but he was sadly killed just before, about 2 months before they started recording for this.
I didn't realize that timing.
Yeah, so Ringo didn't feel it was appropriate to release those 2 songs on this album, so he did not. Yeah. But anyway, so the usage of wrack with a W here creates both the idea of thinking hard on how to create a hit song, but it's also used along with the damage it does to an artist trying to please fans and record companies. It is exactly the kind of wordplay I would expect from George Harrison, and Ringo Starr performs the song very well. And you could just hear the guitars on it, and you're just like, that feels very Beatles, and it is because it's George Harrison.
Yeah.
This next one is also a song. It's called Rack My Brains, and is sung by Huxton Creepers, which was an 80s pop rock band out of Australia. It was released on their 1988 album, So This Is Paris. The song is about a person who has been changed by a lover. Here's the chorus, quote, "Something has happened to me. I'm not in touch with the way that I feel. Something inside me has changed. I can't understand it, though I rack my brains," end quote.
Okay.
Huxton Creepers were clearly a fan of turns of phrase because they also have songs called Skin of My Teeth, Part the Seas, and I Swallowed My Pride, all of which do not necessarily make sense. They're all idiomatic. Like you wouldn't necessarily know what those mean if you were not a native speaker and understand the multiple uses of many of those words.
Right.
So this next one is a photograph by David M. Spindell. And I was aware of David Spindell because he did a lot of baseball photographs, which are just really phenomenal. But I also knew he did some of the John Lennon photographs. And there was a session he was brought in to do that was John and Yoko that were recording something. And so that helped him bring him to a much wider audience than just sports. But I did not know that he also has a series of photographs in a collection called Rebuses, which he started putting together in either the late 1980s or early 1990s. And according to the Oxford English Dictionary, a rebus is, quote, a cryptic representation of a word or phrase by pictures, symbols, arrangement of letters, etc., which suggests the word or phrase or the syllables of which it is made up, end quote. So I'm going to give you an example that a lot of you may remember from school. I certainly remember it from when I was a kid. If you imagine a drawing of a Persian, the person is not Persian, person. If you imagine the person is leaping forward in like a hopscotch game, and at the end of the boxes of hopscotch is the word conclusions. So this would be a rebus, and it means jumping to conclusions.
Very clever.
Yes. So that is just an example that I remember as a kid for this kind of a thing. So Spindell's work, one of the images is of a series of human brains that are the size of pocket billiard balls and vary in color with solids and stripes and a black 8-ball, except they're all brains. And they are arranged in the triangle-shaped rack that begins a game of 8-ball, which is the same rack, if you're not familiar with 8-ball, that you also use for straight pool, one pocket, bank pool, and snooker. As you might imagine, the image is meant to represent our phrase, rack your brains. And we're going to play a game with this collection in our behind the scenes video. So you can join us there to play along. We'll put up an image. I'll give you a few moments to guess what it is. And then you got to, then I'll reveal the answer. So we're going to do that in our behind the scenes video, which airs every Friday on our Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod. Rack Your Brain Puzzles is a 2015 puzzle book by Michael Watkins. Here's the synopsis from the publisher. Quote, Rack Your Brain Puzzles was designed to raise money for charities and people in need of help. This book is a puzzle book that has mazes, word searches, and spot the differences. I hope everyone enjoys this book. Note, 100% of profits go to helping someone in need. Thank you. End quote.
Okay.
So there's that. I don't know who was being helped by this. Sometimes I might be like, I'm a charity case. 100% of the profits will go to help me in need. But I don't think that was the case for this book. I don't want to defame this book.
Okay.
But anyway, it just makes me laugh, though, because go to helping someone in need. I'm like, I need more specifics because that could be anyone.
What kind of need?
Racks Your Brain is a 2019 artwork by Mix Karen. It is a watercolor and ink pen on drawing block, and it's available on artmallglobal.com. The image is one of two hands wringing out a disembodied brain, as if trying to get some memory to fall out. It is far more beautiful than I made it sound just now, and it's not gruesome at all. It's actually very pretty. I like it.
Yeah. Well, the brain is white, so the color's basically like mostly removed from it, and the water essentially that's like being wrung from the brain is multicolored in like pastels.
Nice. Yeah.
So it's pretty. It's kind of, yeah, that's really neat.
Rack Your Brain is a teachers pay teachers store that creates resources for other teachers to use in the classroom. It's based out of California. Here's the About section. Quote, I've been teaching fifth grade since 2019. My store contains a variety of resources I've created for my students throughout the years. I believe that teamwork and collaboration are important aspects of creating a positive classroom environment. I enjoy using creative teaching strategies such as escape rooms and digital breakouts to facilitate critical thinking and teamwork. End quote. So I saw a lot of really cool stuff that was on this show, and of course we'll link to it in the show notes and on Patreon. But in this, when I was researching for the show, I saw lots of stuff in this store, and there were things like you could buy escape rooms that you could license basically and get all the stuff to be able to do in the classroom, and there were a lot of variety of like puzzle type things, all stuff meant for critical thinking, which Dan's opinion here, but as someone who teaches crisis response throughout the nation, I can say that critical thinking skills are one of the first things to go in a crisis if you don't train yourself to use those. And I think we need way more ways to use critical thinking in K through 12 education as well as college education, higher education. We've got to do
Right.
more teaching people to use critical thinking so it isn't the first thing that gets dumped when you get
When
into a
something
crisis.
happens, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a biological component to that is hard to overcome that you have to learn to recognize so you can overcome that particular element of it so you
Right.
can get your critical thinking skills back. Otherwise, you're just going to fall back on muscle memory, which is why training is so important. But nonetheless, the more we could use critical thinking, the better off we would be. So, rack
Absolutely.
your brain. Great job. I love what you're doing
And
there.
yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it too. Those escape rooms, the and digital breakouts, that's
Mm-hmm.
very much what that does. It puts on some pressure, but in a safe environment to,
Right.
it's like using those, applying that critical thinking,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, in a moment of pressure.
Yeah.
So
And I know they're not everybody's style. Not everybody thinks in the puzzle format, right? There are lots of other
yeah,
ways to do critical thinking, but I do think the skill set, we need to find ways to hone it.
yeah, for sure.
Well, this is a fun phrase. I like the idea of stretching my brain to try to remember or just think of something. It gives me a mental image of my brain with arms and legs in a Jane Fonda workout style, getting ready to do some stretches so we can get a good session of thinking or remembering. And since humor is both my joyous state and my coping mechanism, my brain giving me a good laugh with the phrase is always welcome. So I just really enjoy that about Rack Your Brains. Well, that's about all we have for today. If you have any thoughts on the show or pop culture references we should have included, reach out to us on Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod, or comment on our website, bunnytrailspod.com.
It's poll time. Recently, we asked our patrons about conferences. Love them or hate them? Nearly 70% said it's a love-hate relationship. Word. Cheryl says, quote, I love online conferences where there's a few lives and the rest I can watch in my own time. I'm disabled, so I do one live conference a year with my embroidery guild. I'm able to work things out, so I have time to rest in between classes, end quote.
Okay, embroidery guild sounds so cool.
Right? It does. It's like, oh, you have a guild? I want a guild.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, embroidery is pretty awesome too.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
super
it's really neat.
impressive.
Yeah, anyone who does that kind of stuff, like the sewing and the knitting and crocheting, embroidery, all that stuff, I lack some of that really fine textile stuff to do the stuff by hand,
Mm-hmm.
and I just never learned how to use a sewing machine. So yeah, although I did make my youngest sew my sweatpants where the the band was coming off from the fabric, and so I made them sit down and sew my stuff together, and I was like watching them going like, I'm gonna learn how to do this. And then they started doing it and something went wrong and they're like, and then they hit it and they moved something and then they hit like 7 different levers in quick succession to like fix something. And I was like, I'm never gonna learn that. Never mind.
I'm not
I'm
gonna learn this.
I have no idea what that kid just did. But like, they did it like a pro, and I was like, well, whatever. I don't have any idea what was going on. But anyway,
Fantastic.
and then I heard them say some words that they probably shouldn't be using at their age. I mean, they're 18, so I guess they could. But, they definitely used a couple of words and were like, why does the thread keep doing this? And I was like, I don't know. That's when I walked out of the room. And then I came back and everything was magically done. So
you're like, I'll leave you to it.
Yep, that was it. All right,
Amazing.
well, back to the conferences thing. Jan notes, quote, I love seeing my colleagues from around the U.S. at national conferences. I'm bringing a national conference to Wichita in 2026, so I won't get the luxury of seeing a new city, but it should be nice, end quote.
Nice.
Yeah, I do. I like that a little bit because when I'm going to conferences, I do get to go to other places. And oftentimes there are things that are part of the conference that are celebrating a place, or something that is local to the city. Like there's a mixer or something, or one of the breakfasts or dinners or something like that is at a location. So I get to see it that way. But I love parts of conferences, and I very much dislike other parts. And as a person who recharges my batteries by being alone or in my comfort zone, conferences are for me naturally a love-hate thing. I go to my state emergency management conference every year and the National Emergency Management Conference most years. Being able to catch up with folks I don't see very often is fun, but it wears me out. And so because of this, I don't go out and see other sites and do other things and experience another city because I have to like rejuvenate. So the only time I'm getting to see them is if the conference has worked something in that's a conference activity into doing something that is, local. But also at the national conference, I often teach a class the 2 days before it. So as a pre-conference activity, and in those cases, I'm already worn out before the conference starts. So then I'm already like, I don't want to do that. I wish there was a way I could just get people together. I don't have to go to certain types of events and do certain things, but I could do all the rest of the stuff and just hang out with friends. But I think that's called being rich, and I'm not that. So
Genius idea, though.
Yeah,
I love it.
I know.
If you figure out how to make that happen, really easily or whatever.
Well, in America, I believe you exploit other people. That's how you do that.
That's not my jam.
Mine either.
Okay, well, that's why I'm poor. Nah. Well, as a reminder, our silly polls mean absolutely nothing and are not scientifically valid. Patrons of all levels, including our free tiers, can take part. Head over to patreon.com/bunnytrailspod to take this week's poll. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week. Until then, remember,
Words belong to their users.